unlocking your world of creativity with best-selling author and brand innovator, Mark Stinson. This episode is brought to you by White Cloud Coffee Roasters, where every bean tells a story of adventure. Visit whitecloudcoffee.com and use the code CREATIVITY.
Welcome back, friends, to our podcast, Your World of Creativity. And today, our world takes us to one of my favorite topics, branding, and particularly how branding can have more purpose and more responsibility than ever before in the culture, in the society. And my guest is Robin Landa. Robin, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm so excited to speak with you.
And I should say, welcome back. I first met you and interviewed Robin back in February of 2023. You had a new book then, The New Art of Ideas. And I'm really thrilled to continue that conversation about the art of ideas, especially as we drill into branding.
Thanks so much. That's great. Yes.
And by way of background, some people just have opinions about branding, but Robin is a professor at Kean University. She's globally recognized as an expert in creativity and branding, has won multiple awards. And I see you're to be inducted into the New Jersey Advertising Hall of Fame. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited about it.
And it's a crowded field. In New Jersey, there's lots of creative agencies and practitioners and lots of artists and creative forces. So you're in good company.
I am. Thank you so much.
And Robin has written, at last count, 25 books. This new release is called Branding as a Cultural Force, Purpose, Responsibility, and Resonance. I think I'd like to start there, Robin. When we first talked a couple of years ago, this pathway of generating ideas was on your mind in that book at the time. What's evolved since then and how we think about branding in a cultural context?
The New Art of Ideas was really about the creative process itself, how you generate and shape and evaluate ideas. And in that book, I introduced the 3 Gs, which are goal, gap, and gain, a framework that asks people to assess whether an idea is truly worthwhile. And the goal is what it serves, the gap is what it fills, and the gain is the benefit. And that is what really led me to another inquiry, which was a book titled Shareworthy, Advertising That Creates Powerful Connections Through Storytelling, which I co-authored with Greg Braun, who is a retired global chief creative officer out of Detroit. And that was published by Columbia University Press. There, in that book, we explored stories that people genuinely want to share. And that, of course, is a goal in advertising. You want people to share your stories on social media. And we found that what people really want to share are stories that are emotional and that align with their social values. They're drawn to brands that don't just sell, but that are authentic, inclusive, and have purpose. And that kind of became the bridge to branding as a cultural force, where the most powerful brands today don't just capture attention, but they ignite some kind of change. They become a force for social good, showing that you can shape culture, you can spark ideas, spark movements, drive social impact. It goes beyond traditional branding, and it aligns with audiences' values to advance causes, to foster some kind of transformation. You think about a brand like Dove, which has really changed the conversation about beauty. And in that book, I interviewed some of the world's leading creative experts, and I offer case studies, and it really just became a vehicle and a tool to understand how brands can influence and advocate and be activists.
That's fantastic. I think about the implications for everyday brand projects, no matter at what level. But your conventional brand book, your brand guidelines, the playbook on how you execute a brand, this sounds like a new chapter now in that book. How are we going to impact the culture? Not just how are we going to stay consistent with the colors, how we're going to use the symbol.
Exactly. It goes really from idea to story to impact.
And it's not an easy thing these days. Culture is ever changing. It's ethereal sometimes. Mercurial, if I can pronounce that word 3 times fast. But shaping culture as a brand, a risky business.
Very risky, yes. And things can backfire, but I think brands have to build that in. They have to know that you're not aiming at everybody ever. Everybody's never your audience. There's always an audience, and whether we're in a political climate that's partisan or not, you're never going to make everybody happy.
Yes. And you mentioned these shareable stories. I think about the brands that, short of a cultural force, became buzz because of a tagline, because of a funny character, because of a funny commercial. But now you're saying, can they function in some more meaningful way? Where are you seeing that in the marketplace?
That's a great question, and I have some really fabulous examples that I love and refer to all the time. You think about cat food. What can cat food do for the world? And Sheba created this project called the Hope Reef, and they started rebuilding coral reef around the world. And one of the first projects they did was they spelled out hope underwater as a living symbol of restoration. And you can't have cat food without fish, and you can't have fish without a coral reef ecosystem. And we are really, truly doing something environmental that's wonderful all over the world, and people have joined with them on it. And then MasterCard has had the Priceless campaign for a very long time, but they started to think about how can people who are disenfranchised be included in this concept of priceless experiences. And when the war in Ukraine broke out, a lot of people started to emigrate to Poland, and MasterCard created an app called Where to Settle to help people find places to live and work in Poland. And they're just doing wonderful things. They have another initiative called the True Name Card, which is one of my students' favorite initiatives. And when I speak at colleges all over the country, students love it, where if you don't have to use your birth name on your credit card or debit card, and MasterCard got banks on board with that. And then another wonderful one is from Michelob, the Dreamcaster, where it was the first time ever, thanks to Michelob's efforts and Microsoft, that a blind sportscaster could commentate a live game, thanks to the technology that they created, so that blind sports fans could experience live basketball through sound and touch. Really one of the finest examples of inclusive design. And then another one that I urge all of your listeners to look up, because you just have to see it to understand it. It was for Orange, which is the largest telecommunications company in France. And Marcel Agency created women's football. And they edited the real footage of women playing, we call it soccer, they call it football. And you watch all these amazing moves by male players. Only halfway through the video do you realize you've actually been watching the women's team.
Yes.
So that they're not accusing people of being prejudiced against female players, but they reveal it so that you're in awe of the women's technical abilities. And then, of course, there's Dove and Ben and Jerry's and Patagonia, who are the gold standards of purpose-driven work.
Yes, these are the classics for sure. What I like about your stories is that sometimes we think about branding and we look in the symbol books. We look at the creative illustrations, we look at the logos, we look at, oh, this great branding. And yet the stories behind the brands, this is what you're really exploring. I wanted to take off of one thing that is in the title of the book, and that's resonance. Certainly, you've described the purpose or responsibility or larger cultural impact that a campaign can make. What makes it resonate? Where does that word fit into the thinking?
It has to really align with people's values. And I think people are looking for entertainment. They're looking for purpose. They want to not be bystanders. They want to be upstanders. They want to march in the parade with you. They want to participate. And so when the story hits home, they really feel it. I'll give you an example. Subaru did a TV spot where the father is handing his car keys over to his little girl. And when he's handing them to her, you see a little girl in the seat, not an 18-year-old girl or 16-year-old ready to drive, but like a 7-year-old. And as somebody whose father handed me a car keys and somebody whose daughter recently learned to drive, I felt like they were talking to me. So you really have to have an insight into your audience in order for a story or a campaign or any of the brand construct to resonate.
Yes. And sometimes when brands take these stands, these points of view, it's inauthentic. It really is maybe a cause, maybe it's a campaign, but it's not a stand. You in the book also address, if you're not careful, there's going to be backlash or skepticism. I think about the greenwashing we often talk about in environmental campaigns. You call it purpose washing. What's the watch out there for brands?
You really have to have what my students would call receipts.
Oh,
You
there you go.
You have to have the action behind the claim. If it's Pride Day and you just put a rainbow flag on in your little square on LinkedIn, it's just performative. It's not a true action. You have to put money behind what you're saying. Almost every creative director that I spoke with said, these people are making money and they have a responsibility to give something back. And so I think if people aren't actually, as my co-author in Shareworthy says, walking the walk, or if you want to say talking the talk or
Yes.
walking the talk, or however people say it, you really need the receipts. And I think people are they scrutinize what you do. Now with social media, it's very easy to look up, and with websites, to look up and see what people are actually doing. And then I think some brands, when Nike faced boycotts after supporting Colin Kaepernick, they stood firm. They aligned their values with the audience, and they knew there wasn't going to be everybody. And in fact, people were burning their Nikes, people who reacted negatively, but then the stock went up because a lot of other people went out and bought Nike because they believed in it. Or even Lego, who in recent years has really risen again. When people, as you say, talk about greenwashing, when people they responded to environmental criticism by accelerating their sustainability goals and increasing their transparency about the materials that they were using. And they are working on it. And I think people respond to transparency and authenticity.
Robin, you've mentioned your students a couple of times, and you're teaching branding concepts for sure, creativity. Often people ask, can you teach creativity? Now, I guess in the context of this cultural discussion, can we teach courage? Or, as I often say, am I learning courage from the newer generation? They have maybe more courage than those of us who try to be walking fine lines or being politically correct or pleasing a lot of people and not stirring things up a bit. What is your point of view standing at the lectern?
Gen Z is amazing. Gen Z doesn't let you get away with anything. They are right on it, and I give them kudos for doing. They are a courageous generation, if you want to talk about them in that broad sense. I remind them of something that Brian Collins, who's one of my heroes in the branding world, he's a great designer and co-founder of Collins Design Company. He says the opposite of courage is conformity. And that, I think, is something that hits home with my students. They don't want to be conformists. They want to be individuals. And to have courage to be an individual, you do need courage. You think about people in the branding world like Richard Branson, who are true iconoclasts. But courage doesn't necessarily mean chaos. It means taking strategically creative risks and really respecting your audience. Another person who I quote is Rob Riley, who is WPP's Global Chief Creative Officer, who says, for the best ideas, you need to have some level of risk or some level of fear that this won't work. And he has a great little test that your listeners can think about, which he calls the press release process. So imagine if your idea, your campaign just landed in culture. What will people say about it, and what will the headline in the media be about it? And if there isn't going to be a headline about it, it's probably not a courageous idea.
Yes. The tree might fall in the woods, but nobody was there. Yes.
Exactly. It has to pop in culture in order for it to have any effect or resonance.
Yes. I wanted to ask you about your teaching approach. I love reading in your CV people like the Carnegie Foundation listing you as one of the great teachers of our time. First of all, congrats on these accolades, but there's got to be more to it for you than simply, here's my PowerPoint, here's the whiteboard, read this, take a test. How are you really, is the word mentoring? Is it the word involve? How are you involving the students in the learning rather than just passing on these precepts?
I'm very lucky. I teach in a very diverse university, and the students are very hungry. They really want to learn. They want careers. And because I teach studio, meaning they actually make their work, they create portfolios. It's active learning. They're not just passively listening to me, which would be dreadful.
No matter how good you are, Robin.
Yeah, no matter how good you are. Yeah. So they're working with me, and I really teach them to generate ideas. I give them frameworks, I think they find very helpful. And what's so rewarding for me is that I would say that 98% of my students are working creative professionals who are going into the field and respecting their audiences and trying to do good in the world. It's just amazing. It's just so gratifying that they are award-winning creative professionals.
Yes. I'm glad you brought up portfolios because as a former creative director and agency head, you saw so many books and they were recitations of here's ads I made. But I remember so clearly the creative director of Wieden and Kennedy saying your portfolio should be about work you want to do, work that you're capable of doing. And it sounds like this is what you're pushing your students towards.
That's exactly right. And we're visiting Wieden and Kennedy tomorrow.
Oh, how fortuitous I bring
Yeah.
this up. No, it really stuck with me that what a fine line. You want to say, yes, this is what I've done. This is what I'm capable of. But if it was only a visual resume, it wasn't really showing your creative potential.
Oh, yes. And my students really learn how to create transmedia campaigns so that they have an idea and it works in particular ways across various media channels. No, you're absolutely right. They have to be great ideas that are, I don't like using the term out of the box, but your audience will understand what I mean
Yes.
by exceptional, strategically creative thinking and not pedestrian. You never want to put in something that if you gave a brand to somebody and the first thing that popped into their head, you never want to do anything like that.
Let's talk about the next generation then, what a portfolio might look like going forward. Again, can't help but wonder AI, cultural shifts, 24-hour news cycles, short attention spans, all of these things. What skills and mindsets do you think we're going to need going forward?
Wow, it really, AI has revolutionized so many industries. So right now, I think my students have to think not only about how to create ideas for branding and advertising, but they have to be systems thinkers, which requires seeing a bigger picture, the kind of the interconnectedness of business and society and environment. So every brand decision from sourcing materials to selecting imagery affects people and the planet. And so where I depart from most of my colleagues in design who constantly talk about human-centered design, I talk about planet first. having a planet first mindset, because no planet, so systems thinking, and then cultural intelligence. You have to really understand people, understand communities and subcultures and cultures. There's not just one culture in this country or any, maybe in Japan, but certainly not in North America, in this country, in the United States. Really being culturally literate and intelligent about how you talk to people and the messaging that you create. And then where AI is concerned, there's creative ethics now. We really have to think about not just getting it done faster, but how do we use these tools responsibly, and how do we credit human creativity and ensure transparency when we use them and prevent harm? So speed is great, but without integrity, it's meaningless.
So good. My guest is Robin Landa. Robin, this idea of branding as a cultural force, I wanted to land our conversation on a question about creatives and brand leaders. You said, no planet, no people. I couldn't help but keep drilling down. No registered voters, no consumers in any demographic, no target markets, no products on the shelf to sell. We think about branding, we think about marketing and advertising in the context of selling. The cash register has to ring or there's no budget, there's no money to do it. And yet you're trying to elevate that conversation. How do we reconcile those two things?
You're absolutely right. And I always talk about the triple bottom line, which is our planet, people, and prosperity and people on the planet. They're not exclusive of each other. You can still prosper and make your transactions, but do something that positively affects the planet and deeply affects humans. I think it's just really thinking about it in this broader sense. And triple bottom line is old already, the idea of planet, people, and prosperity. And so I would add to that cultural representation. Of course, you're thinking about people, but you're thinking about them with a kind of respect and emotional intelligence that gets them to open their wallets.
Yes. And the word culture tends to have maybe a longer periscope. It's a bigger idea than country, market, so forth.
Yeah, I think that when people are respectful of other people's humanity, it really resonates with others, that you feel someone respects you, you'll listen more carefully, more mindfully.
So good. Robin, can't thank you enough for being on the show. We're going to put all your links and, of course, a link to the book in the show notes so people can find you, learn more about your work. It's very, very provocative for one thing, but very encouraging and very helpful in another.
So it's such a pleasure to speak with you, Mark. Thank you for having me as a guest. I appreciate it.
Robin Landa, I appreciate you. And these ideas in branding as a cultural force, purpose, responsibility, and resonance. I like the new three that we can think about. Listeners, we've been talking about branding today. We're going to continue our around the world conversations, talking about all sorts of creativity. Singer-songwriters, authors, even architects and engineers. We bring all this creative thinking to bear in this podcast. We want you to be inspired. We want to help you organize these ideas. And most of all, we want you to gain the confidence and the connections to launch your work out into the world. And that's what it's all about. We also want to thank our sponsor, White Cloud Coffee. They help fuel our creative conversations every week. And listeners, you can enjoy 10% off your first order at whitecloudcoffee.com. Just use the code creativity at checkout. And if you'd like to download a free ebook of my book, Your World of Creativity, you can visit mark-stinson.com. So until next time, I'm Mark Stinson, and we'll keep unlocking your world of creativity.